it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. I am actually so excited about today's video. I had so much fun putting this list together, and I'm also just thrilled to kind of see your opinions and thoughts within the comments. So please, if you are compelled to write a comment, let me know down below your thoughts on the topic of this video, which is books I personally think are worth the hype. Obviously, this is 100% subjective. You might see some books on this list that you read because of hype and thought they were bad, but for me, all of these books either met or exceeded my already incredibly high expectations going into these stories, which I think is personally pretty impressive because it is really easy to be set up for fail if everyone loves something because you just go in expecting the world and they might just deliver like slightly under that, but it feels so crushing. But anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into the books that I personally think are worth every single drop of hype they receive. They're all excellent. So starting with the first book, I feel like it wouldn't be a video if I didn't talk about Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. This is obviously one of my all-time favorite, fantasy trilogies of all time. Brandon Sanderson's one of my favorite authors. I have read so many of his books, but I would say Mistborn in terms of booktube is probably one of the most popular and just ones that I see the most either on TBRs or just on favorites lists in general, and that is entirely warranted in my perspective. I also feel like this is one of the most perfect places to start with Sanderson in terms of like encountering his works for the first time. This is a fantasy trilogy with the setup and premise is what if the Dark Lord won? It is set in this sort of desolate landscape future, and the magic system is centered around the consumption of metals. And in the first novel, you're following a ragtag group of individuals trying to overthrow this Dark Lord. Personally, when I read this trilogy for the first time back in college, I had never encountered a fantasy tale that could scale so successfully. My brain was warped in so many different directions as Brandon Sanderson just continued to blow my mind. It's an epic, it's an adventure, and I just feel like for so many people, if this is your first foray into epic fantasy, you're gonna have so much fun. There's romance, there's great characters, and I truly think just like an approachable epic fantasy plot that is just gonna like blow you out of the water. It's so good. I've now read this series 2.5 times and I have only like grown to appreciate it more and more. It's masterful and so much fun. This is also a book series that I recommend to just about anyone who wants to read fantasy, like IRL and on the internet. It's just a wonderful, wonderful place to start. Next on my list is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. This one might be a little contentious because I know some people really dislike this book, which is entirely fine. But for me personally, V.E. Schwab, both as an author, but particularly within this series, is just one that I loved every single second of. It's multi-perspective, it's full of adventure and magic and angst and growth and all of that sort of thing. I also personally find V.E. Schwab's character work to just be really impressive, and I always feel deeply connected to them like as individuals and as a group. Like as a reader is something that I'm just so thrilled with. There isn't really a V.E. Schwab book that I picked up and didn't feel anything for anyone. I always felt so connected, but particularly this is a story that just has such a fun and clever premise. It's essentially following 4 parallel Londons. One is Grey London, which is our world, which has no magic. Red London, which is absolutely flourishing with magic. There's White London that's basically being torn apart by magic, and Black London, which is the London that no one can access. It's kind of destroyed itself. And we follow one of our main characters, Kel, who can kind of go in between all these different Londons. He meets characters along the way. There's political consequences. And again, I just feel like this is a trilogy that scales itself up very well, but really also scales his characters up very successfully. I feel like the first one is all right. It's like a 3.5 stars for me. Very entertaining, but nothing that was like an all-time fave. But going into books 2 and 3, I just feel like V.E. Schwab completely like propelled the story to new heights and made me so emotionally invested into everyone, which just made the story so much fun. There's also a magical competition in book 2, which is a little bit of a plot like immediate read for me. It was just a grand old time. I love trials. I love when people are like competing against each other and there's this underdog story. No one's expecting them to do well, but then, inevitably they do probably pretty well, and I just love that setup so much. But yeah, I personally think this is a incredibly fun, fast-paced, character-led fantasy story with a great and clever magical backdrop that just will keep you entertained. Next up, I have another author worth the hype, and that is Rick Riordan. I feel like I don't talk about Rick Riordan books enough on my channel. I obviously have read a lot of them, but that's almost because Rick Riordan is like so obvious to talk about, because who hasn't read Rick Riordan? One, it's entirely true that not everyone has. And two, in me not talking about them, I'm realizing that I'm underplaying how excellent his stories are. I mean, every single series this man has put out has always been one of my favorites, and this has been like basically my entire life. Rick Riordan has been a cornerstone in my reading experience, and just kind of like reading all of his series throughout my entire life has been such a joy, and I feel like the man has not lost his talent. If anything, he has evolved and made his characters and his stories even better throughout time. And I just feel like if you want a fun, middle grade focused quest about characters not only trying to save the world, but also growing into the best versions of themselves, friendship and humor and everything you want along the way, like check out any series by Rick Riordan, because you will not be disappointed. In fact, I would say The Trials of Apollo by him, which is his most recent series, is maybe one of my top Rick Riordan series of all time. I feel like it's just a masterclass of Rick Riordan's humor and character work combining with Greek mythology, like everything you want. Big shout out, tipping my hat to Rick Riordan. You are worth the hype, you are a treasure. Next up is a more recent read for me, and one I was a little nervous picking up just because I feel like BookTube is in love with it right now, and I was kind of concerned that it wouldn't be able to live up to the hype, but it did. I'm also now a fangirl, totally sold, and that is Jade City by Fonda Lee. And I actually hear the sequel is even better than this first installment, but this is every cent worth the hype. Check out this book if you haven't. This is a Godfather Asian-inspired urban fantasy story that is just blindingly placed from page one, full of incredibly written action and martial arts, and just has one of the most clever concepts at its core, which is this is a story that is set primarily in the city of Kekon, which has been ruled for a significant amount of time basically by two crime families, and both of these families deal with the trade and the consumption of jade, which is also something that can only be mined within this area. And jade, once consumed, essentially grants individuals superhuman powers and abilities in terms of combat. So when a new drug and a new like third-party interest comes on the market, which allows jade to be kind of consumed by the average person, it begins to upend the very delicate balance between these two crime families. And in fact, throughout this entire series, it's really just watching the temperature get turned up between these two families and watching them kind of fall apart and ultimately go to war with each other. This is full of family drama, political drama, incredible combat, as I've already alluded to. It is so good and so intense. There are so many wonderful character connections, and just like the intensity of the story makes it impossible to put down. But anyway, all that is to say, it's 100% worth the hype. If you haven't read it, please check it out. I'm gonna be reading Jade War soon because I can't stop thinking about this, so worth the hype. Next is a beloved story, and that is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. Here's the thing, I'm a simple girl. Heist stories, I'm basically immediately interested, especially when you're bringing together a ragtag group of individuals trying to do something that's like sort of good, but also probably a little bit bad. This sort of walking the line of morally gray, individuals like trying to take advantage of the system, but at the end of the day are trying to do the right thing. It's something that I just eat up like candy. And that to me is what Leigh Bardugo does so successfully within Six of Crows. It's a multi-POV story about a bunch of different types of bad people coming together to work together to steal something so they can make a bunch of money. It's charming, it's entertaining, it has a bunch of wonderful character work and interaction, it has angst. It's just to me like one of the most perfectly crafted YA novels. I feel like there's a reason why people love it. I agree. And I would say if you haven't read Six of Crows, it's definitely worth picking up. It's also only a duology, so it's a quick read all around and it'll make you feel things. You've got 6 dangerous outcasts, you've got a fun, dark, fantastical background and plot, and ultimately you have humor and antics and people just trying to like do an impossible thing and along the way try not to get killed. It's so entertaining, it's so much fun. I think it's worth the hype. Next on my list is An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. This is the first book to a fantasy YA quartet, and one that I feel like I have talked about a lot on my channel, but I love this series. This is one of the most popular YA fantasy series out there, and I personally think with good reason. This is a Roman-inspired dual perspective fantasy story about two people from two different walks of life. It's essentially set in a world where there's this very controlling militaristic power, and our main female character's brother is essentially arrested, and she makes a deal with the rebel group there that they'll help break him out of prison if she becomes a spy by kind of like becoming a servant within this military academy. And her other main character is an officer at this military academy. They should hate each other. They do hate each other, but they're inexplicably drawn to one another too. The reason why I feel like this is 100% worth the hype is that Sabaa Tahir is able to create, personally, one of the most dramatic, drawn out in a good way, angsty romance of two people that you just want to be together so badly, but for so many logical reasons have just been kept apart throughout this entire series. There's just so much yearning and angst that will keep you flipping the pages, combining with the fact I feel like this has excellent writing. I love the Roman-inspired historical element. I feel like the magic and the plot and the pacing are all exceptionally well done too. But for me personally, my favorite element is definitely the romance, and I just feel like Sabaa Tahir has given us something that is just wonderfully paced and drawn out and will kill you from the inside out. It will be so painful reading this because you just want them to be together, but it's complicated, and that's what makes it so entertaining and such a good book. I'm just saying. The very last book that in my opinion is 100% worth the hype is another recent read, and that is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This is one of my favorite books of all time. This is another series I just checked out for the first time this year, and that was 100% because of the hype it received on BookTube, and I think was entirely warranted. I flew through the first one, I flew through the second one, and I also cannot wait to read the third one coming out in November. I honestly feel like R.F. Kuang within this series does things that I've never really encountered before. Her ability to write not only military strategy, but also the dark realities of war and conflict is just something I feel like I haven't really encountered in this way within fantasy personally. This is a book that has made me feel overwhelmed, confused, frustrated, and just so many different emotional responses to the characters and the realities and the situations that she puts her characters in. But if you're not familiar, The Poppy War is a grimdark fantasy story that's inspired by the Opium Wars and the Song period within Chinese history, and it's definitely very much rooted within that historical inspiration, and definitely there's a lot of commentary both within the society that our main character Rin lives in, but also from a Western colonial perspective as well. This is a book that just propels itself forward. It is so fast-paced, and it's full of characters that you want to hug and shake and punch in the face sometimes. It is truly just one of the best crafted fantasy series I have encountered in a long time. It is an incredibly dark story, but one that will just keep you gripped from page one. I don't know. It is one of the best books I've read this year, both the first and second book. It's definitely making my list of best books of 2020. I cannot wait to read more by this author. I was astounded by this novel as well as The Dragon Republic, which is the sequel. I have so much respect for what she did within this series. I just think it is worth all the accolades and all of the praise it has received. Because I think it's incredible. Alrighty guys, those are all the books I personally think are worth the hype. I would love to know your thoughts and your opinions down in the comments, so please let me know what books you personally love, or maybe books that you think might be overhyped, if you agree or disagree with some of the books that I featured in this video. I would love to know. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon with another one soon. Goodbye!